Hello everyone, I'm Kenji Minemura, an ophthalmologist in Japan. I've been observing many court cases since 2006, and today I'd like to give you an overview of the malpractice system in Japan. When you are involved in a medical court case in Japan, who will judge the case? All the cases are processed by professional judges, and there are normally 3 judges. There's no jury system in Japan. There is a lay judge system in which professional judges and ordinary people evaluate cases together, but this system is not applied to medical malpractice cases. If you are involved in a medical dispute in Japan, you risk owing not only civil liability but also criminal liability. To make sure of the difference between civil trials and criminal trials, I'd like to show you this slide. This is a view from the top of Nagoya Castle, the castle of the 4th biggest city in Japan. You can see the court on the right, and a hospital in front, and a police station on the left. If you're sued by the patient side for compensation and brought directly to the court, it is a civil case. If you are taken to the police station first and then brought to court by a public prosecutor, it is a criminal case. There's always a risk of being involved in a criminal trial in Japan. In the Penal Code of Japan, there is an article for punishing negligence of social activities. You can be imprisoned for up to 5 years or fined up to 1 million yen or about 10,000 US dollars. Such criminal cases are not that common, but some do take place. Let me show you one of these criminal cases. There was a case in which a doctor removed too much corneal stroma in LASIK surgery. The patient was a 19-year-old male. He was scheduled to have the corneal stroma removed to a 44 micrometer depth. But on the day of surgery, another patient was late, and the 19-year-old patient had surgery first. But an assistant mistook the patient for the patient who was late. The assistant set their excimer laser machine to remove the corneal stroma to an 89 micrometer depth, which was the plan for the patient who was late. And the surgeon didn't notice the assistant's mistake. Consequently, the 19-year-old patient developed hyperopia in both eyes. He got angry and complained to the police. The doctor and the assistant were prosecuted and found guilty, and the doctor was fined 1 million yen or about 10,000 US dollars. Actually, not that many patients to go to the police, but you still have more risk of being sued in a civil trial. Here is a chart outlining the decision-making system for civil trials in Japan. At first, your performance is evaluated to determine if it was negligent or not. If it was not negligent, then you are not liable, even if the patient suffered some damage. If your performance is regarded as negligent, then judges evaluate the causal relationship between the negligence and the patient's damage. If there was a more than 80% probability that the negligence caused the damage, then you have to compensate for all the damage. There's no cap system, but judges don't award an incredible amount of non-physical damage in Japan, so the amount of compensation is at most some hundreds of millions of yen or some millions of US dollars. If the possibility of a causal relationship is roughly 10 to 70%, then you don't have to compensate for all the damage, but have to compensate only for the lost chances to avoid the damage. I think this system is unique to Japan. The amount of the compensation for these cases varies, but is normally about 1 million to 8 million yen, or about 10,000 to 80,000 US dollars. If your performance was negligent but that negligence didn't cause the damage, then you are not liable. The biggest problem is probably the way of evaluating negligence. Negligence is defined as a failure to meet the medical standard, but there are no rules for defining the medical standard. Then how do judges determine the medical standard? They define the medical standard in each case referring to the evidence provided in that particular case. The evidence provided differs from case to case, so inevitably the medical standard changes from case to case. I'd like to show you another case report, a case of overlooking congenital glaucoma. The patient was a 4-month-old female. Her mother took her to the eye department of a hospital, complaining of discharge in both her daughter's eyes. A doctor observed that her corneas and anterior chambers were clear, but conjunctivas were injected and there was discharge. The doctor diagnosed her with conjunctivitis and prescribed ofloxacin eye drops. 3 months after the first visit, when the patient was 7 months old, her mother took her to the hospital again, complaining of her daughter's conjunctival injection, outdoor photophobia, and sleeping in a face-down position. The same doctor observed that her corneas and anterior chambers were clear, but there was a slight conjunctival injection and discharge. The doctor concluded from these findings that there was no sign of congenital glaucoma and considered her photophobia to be a symptom of conjunctivitis and told the mother to return if any problems persisted. 1 year and 2 months later, the patient went blind in both eyes due to congenital glaucoma. A third-party doctor, an expert in glaucoma, said that he would have checked intraocular pressure and fundus on her second visit, but that it would have been difficult to ask that much from that hospital. Even so, the judges found negligence of not checking the intraocular pressure and fundus on the second visit, and awarded the patient side 130 million yen, or about 1.3 million US dollars, as compensation for all the damage. It means judges recognize that if the doctor had checked the intraocular pressure and fundus on the second visit, the patient probably would not have gone blind. So in this case, a glaucoma expert suggested that it was too difficult to recognize it as negligent, but the judges found negligence nevertheless. This case is a good example of the power judges have to decide the medical standard in court cases. So these professional judges have a great deal of power to decide medical standards. But they are only the same human as doctors are. And if they turn out to be unskilled as judges, they make strange decisions. Here, I'd like to show you the number of medical malpractice civil cases in Japan. Not only ophthalmological cases, but all medical cases. There are actually more medical disputes brought to attorneys, but if we focus on court cases, there have been about 800 cases per year for the past several years. So how do these cases finish? Half of them go to settlement before reaching the final judgment. The other half reach the final judgment. In about 1/4 of these cases, the patient side is awarded compensation. And in 3/4 of these cases, they are not. Consequently, in about 60% of the cases, the patient side gets compensation, whether through a settlement or through a win in court. But as we saw earlier, for cases reaching final judgment, the rate of wins for the patient side is very low. I think one of the reasons is that if the hospital or doctor side realizes they are likely to lose, they tend to then compromise and go to settlement. On the contrary, the patient side tend not to compromise even if they are likely to lose, and wait for the final judgment instead. And I think there are some attorneys who undertake cases that seem likely to lose and in fact do lose. I'd like to show you another case, a case of hemifacial spasm after a chalazion surgery. A 57-year-old male visited a doctor and asked him to remove a chalazion on his upper right eyelid, and the doctor removed it. But after the surgery, the patient experienced ptosis of the right eyelid. After the chalazion surgery, the patient had a ptosis surgery 3 times, each in a different clinic or hospital. But he developed a spasm on right eyelid, and his symptoms grew worse and worse. Finally, the spasm developed into a hemifacial spasm. He then sued the doctor who had performed the chalazion surgery. But hemifacial spasms are caused by dysfunction of the facial nerve, so the focus is completely different to the focus of a chalazion. And clearly, the chalazion surgery had nothing to do with the hemifacial spasm, so of course the patient lost the case. I don't understand why the attorney undertook such an unwinnable case. Now, I'd like to just briefly sum up what we've talked about today. First, all the cases in court are decided by professional judges. Second, as a doctor, you have a risk of owing not only civil liability but also criminal liability. Third, there is no rule for defining medical standards, and judges determine them referring to evidence provided in each case. Fourth, unwinnable cases are often brought to court, and the patient side loses more often than not.